Philip Henry Sheridan claimed he was born in Albany, New York on March 6, 1831. He grew up in Somerset, Ohio. Fully grown, he reached only 5 feet 5 inches tall, a stature that led to the nickname Little Phil. Sheridan worked as a boy in town general stores and eventually as a head clerk and bookkeeper for a dry goods store. In 1848, he obtained an appointment to the United States Military Academy from one of his customers. In his 3rd year at West Point, Sheridan was suspended for a year for fighting with a classmate. He graduated in 1853, 34th in his class of 52 cadets. Sheridan was commissioned a brevet 2nd lieutenant and was assigned to the 1st U.S. Infantry Regiment at Fort Duncan, Texas, then to the 4th U.S. Infantry at Fort Reading, California. In 1855, he became involved with the Yakima War and Rogue River Wars, gaining experience in leading small combat teams. He lived with a mistress during part of his tour of duty, an Aboriginal woman named Sednaya, daughter of the chief of the Klickitat tribe. He was promoted to 1st lieutenant in March 1861. In the fall of 1861, Sheridan was ordered to travel to Jefferson Barracks near St. Louis, Missouri, for assignment to the 13th U.S. Infantry. In December, Sheridan was appointed Chief Commissary Officer of the Army of Southwest Missouri, but convinced the department commander to give him the position of Quartermaster General as well. In January 1862, he reported for duty to Major General Samuel Curtis and served under him at the Battle of Pea Ridge. Sheridan was appointed Colonel of the 2nd Michigan Cavalry on May 27, 1862, despite having no experience in the mounted arm. A month later, Sheridan commanded his first forces in combat, leading a small brigade. At the Battle of Boonville, Mississippi, July 1, 1862, he held back several regiments of Brigadier General James R. Chalmers's Confederate cavalry, deflected a large flanking attack with a noisy diversion, and reported critical intelligence about enemy dispositions. Sheridan was assigned to command the 11th Division, 3rd Corps in Major General Don Carlos Buell's Army of the Ohio. On October 8, 1862, Sheridan led his division in the Battle of Perryville. On December 31, 1862, the first day of the Battle of Stones Rivers, Sheridan anticipated a Confederate assault and positioned his division in preparation for it. His division held back the Confederate onslaught on his front until their ammunition ran out and they were forced to withdraw. This action was instrumental in giving the Union Army time to rally at a strong defensive position. For his actions, he was promoted to Major General on April 10, 1863. In 6 months, he had risen from captain to Major General. During the Battle of Chattanooga at Missionary Ridge on November 25, 1863, Sheridan's division and others in George Thomas's army broke through the Confederate lines. In a wild charge, Sheridan spotted a group of Confederate officers outlined against the crest of the ridge and shouted, "Here's at you." An exploding shell sprayed him with dirt and he responded, "That's damn ungenerous. I shall take those guns for that." The Union charge broke through the Confederate lines on the ridge and Bragg's army fell into retreat. General Ulysses S. Grant, newly promoted to the General-in-Chief of the Union armies, summoned Sheridan to the Eastern Theater to command the Cavalry Corps of the Army of the Potomac. Sheridan arrived at the headquarters on April 5, 1864, less than a month before the start of Grant's massive overland campaign against Robert E. Lee. When Meade quarreled with Sheridan for not performing his duties of screening and reconnaissance as ordered, Sheridan told Meade that he could whip Stuart if Meade would let him. Meade reported the conversation to Grant, who replied, "Well, he generally knows what he is talking about. Let him start right out and do it." Meade deferred to Grant's judgment and issued orders to Sheridan to proceed against the enemy's cavalry, and from May 9th through May 24th, send him on a raid toward Richmond, directly challenging the Confederate cavalry. The raid was less successful than hoped, although his raid managed to mortally wound Confederate cavalry commander Major General J.E.B. Stuart at Yellow Tavern on May 11th and beat Major General Fitzhugh Lee at Meadow Bridge on May 12th. Rejoining the Army of the Potomac, Sheridan's cavalry fought inclusively at Hawes' Shop, a battle with heavy casualties that allowed Confederate cavalry to obtain valuable intelligence about Union dispositions. They seized the critical crossroads that triggered the Battle of Cold Harbor and withstood a number of assaults until reinforced. Grant then ordered Sheridan on a raid to the northwest to break the Virginia Central Railroad and to link up with the Shenandoah Valley Army of Major General David Hunter. He was intercepted by the Confederate cavalry under Major General Wade Hampton at the Battle of Trevilian Station. where in the largest all-cavalry battle of the war he achieved tactical success on the first day, but suffered heavy casualties during multiple assaults on the second. He withdrew without achieving his assigned objectives. On his return march, he once again encountered the Confederate cavalry at Samaria Church on June 24th, where his men suffered significant casualties, but successfully protected the Union supply wagons they were escorting. Throughout the war, the Confederacy sent armies out of Virginia through the Shenandoah Valley to invade Maryland and Pennsylvania and threaten Washington, D.C. Lieutenant General Jabal Early, following the same pattern in the Valley campaigns of 1864 and hoping to distract Grant from the siege of Petersburg, attacked Union forces near Washington and raided several towns in Pennsylvania. Grant organized the Middle Military Division, whose field troops were known as the Army of the Shenandoah. Sheridan took command at Harper's Ferry on August 7, 1864. His mission was not only to defeat Early's army and to close off the northern invasion route, but to deny the Shenandoah Valley as a productive agricultural region to the Confederacy. Although Sheridan assumed that Jabal Early was effectively out of action and he considered withdrawing his army to rejoin Grant at Petersburg, Early received reinforcements, and on October 19th at Cedar Creek launched a well-executed surprise attack while Sheridan was absent from his army, 10 miles away at Winchester. Hearing the distant sounds of artillery, he rode aggressively to his command. He reached the battlefield about 10:30 a.m. and began to rally his men. Sheridan's actions are generally credited with saving the day. Sheridan received a personal letter of thanks from Abraham Lincoln and a promotion to Major General in the regular army as of November 8, 1864, making him the fourth-ranking general in the army after Grant, Sheridan, and Meade. Sheridan spent the next several months occupied with light skirmishes and fighting guerrillas. Sheridan's men finally moved out of their winter quarters on February 27, 1865, and headed east. The orders from General Grant were to destroy the Virginia Central Railroad and the James River Canal, capturing Lynchburg if practicable, then either join General William T. Sherman in North Carolina or return to Winchester. Sheridan interpreted Grant's orders liberally, and instead of heading to North Carolina in March 1865, he moved to rejoin the Army of the Potomac at Petersburg. On the way to Petersburg at the Valley of Waynesboro, March 2nd, he trapped the remainder of Early's armies and 1,500 soldiers surrendered. On April 1st, he cut off General Lee's lines of support at Five Forks, forcing Lee to evacuate Petersburg. Sheridan's aggressive and well-executed performance at the Battle of Sailor's Creek on April 6 effectively sealed the fate of Lee's armies. Capturing over 20% of his remaining men, President Lincoln sent Grant a telegram on April 7th. General Sheridan says, "If the thing is pressed, I think that Lee will surrender. Let the thing be pressed." At Appomattox Courthouse, April 9, 1865, Sheridan blocked Lee's escape, forcing the surrender of the Army of Northern Virginia later that day. After General Lee surrendered, and that of General Joseph E. Johnston in North Carolina, the only significant Confederate force remaining was in Texas under General Edmund Kirby Smith. Grant appointed Sheridan to commander of the Military District of the Southwest on May 17, 1865, with orders to defeat Smith without delay and restore Texas and Louisiana to Union control. However, Smith surrendered before Sheridan reached New Orleans. Grant was also concerned about the situation in neighboring Mexico, where 40,000 French soldiers propped up the puppet regime of Austrian Archduke Maximilian. He gave Sheridan permission to gather a large Tex occupation force. Sheridan assembled 50,000 men in 3 corps, quickly occupied Texas coastal cities, spread inland, and began to patrol the U.S.-Mexican border. The Army's presence, U.S. political pressure, and the growing resistance of Benito Juarez induced the French to abandon their claims against Mexico. Napoleon III withdrew his troops in 1866, and the following year, Emperor Maximilian was executed for treason. In March 1867, Sheridan was appointed military governor of the 5th Military District, consisting of Texas and Louisiana. Sheridan was unpopular in Texas, and he didn't have much appreciation for the Lone Star State. In 1866, his attitude was widely reported: "If I owned Texas and hell, I would rent Texas and live in hell." Sheridan had been feuding with President Andrew Johnson for months over interpretations of the Military Reconstruction Acts and voting right issues. The president removed Sheridan, stating to an outraged General Grant that his rule, in fact, being one of absolute tyranny without references to the principles of our government or the nature of our free institutions. In August 1867, Grant appointed Sheridan to head the Department of the Missouri and pacify the plains. His troops, even supplemented with state militia, were spread too thin to have any real effect. He conceived a strategy similar to the one he used in the Shenandoah Valley. In the winter campaign of 1868-1869, he attacked the Cheyenne, Kiowa, and Comanche tribes in their winter quarters, taking their supplies and livestock and killing those who resisted, driving the rest back into their reservations. Eventually, the Aboriginals returned to their designated reservations. Sheridan's department conducted the Red River War, the Ute War, and the Great Sioux War of 1876-77, which resulted in the death of Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer. The raids subsided during the 1870s and were almost over by the early 1880s as Sheridan became the commanding general of the U.S. Army. Sheridan was promoted to lieutenant general on March 4, 1869. In 1870, President Grant, at Sheridan's request, sent him to observe and report on the Franco-Prussian War. As a guest of the King of Prussia, he was present when Napoleon III surrendered to the Germans, which was gratifying to Sheridan following his experiences with the French in Mexico. He later toured most of Europe and returned to the U.S. to report to Grant that although the Prussians were very good, brave fellows, had gone into each battle with the determination to win, there is nothing to be learned here professionally. He criticized their handling of cavalry, however he referred to theirs as a perfect military system and had a high opinion of the officer corps. In 1871, Sheridan was present in Chicago, Illinois during the Great Chicago Fire and coordinated military relief efforts. The mayor, to calm the panic, placed the city under martial law and issued a proclamation putting Sheridan in charge. As there were no widespread disturbances, martial law was lifted within a few days. On June 3, 1875, Sheridan married Irene Rucker, a daughter of an Army quartermaster. She was 22 and he was 44. They had 4 children together. After the wedding, Sheridan and his wife moved to Washington, D.C. The protection of the Yellowstone area was Sheridan's personal crusade. As early as 1875, Sheridan promoted military control over the area and prevented the destruction of natural formations and wildlife. In 1882, the Department of the Interior granted rights to the Yellowstone Park Improvement Company to develop 4,000 acres in the park. Their plan was to build a railroad into the park and sell the land to developers. Sheridan personally organized opposition to the plan and lobbied Congress for protection of the park, including expansion, military control, reducing the development to 10 acres, and prohibiting leasing near park attractions. In addition, he arranged an expedition to the park for President Chester A. Arthur and other influential men. His lobbying soon paid off. A rider was added to the Sundry Civil Bill of 1883, giving Sheridan and his supporters almost everything for which they had asked. In 1886, after a string of ineffectual and sometimes criminal superintendents, Sheridan ordered the 1st U.S. Cavalry into the park. The military operated the park until the National Park Service took over in 1916, when we went into World War I. In 1888, Sheridan suffered a series of massive heart attacks. At 55 years of age, thin in his youth, he had reached over 200 pounds. After his first heart attack, the U.S. Congress quickly passed legislation to promote him to general on June 1, 1888, and he received the news from the congressional delegation with joy despite his pain. His family moved him from the heat of Washington, D.C. to his summer cottage in Nantucket section of Dartmouth, Massachusetts, where he died of heart failure on August 5, 1888. His body was returned to Washington, D.C., and he was buried on a hillside facing the capital city near Arlington House in Arlington National Cemetery. Sheridan appeared on the $10 U.S. Treasury notes issued in 1890 and 1891. His bust then reappeared on the $5 silver certificate in 1896. These rare notes are in great demand by collectors today. Sheridan is the only person to be featured on the U.S. $10 bill who was strictly associated with the military. The M551 Sheridan tank is named after General Sheridan, which served its troops well during the Second World War.